Hey, and welcome back to the panel room at ConTinual. I'm your host, Jim Nettles, and tonight we're going to be talking about one of those fun beasties that we all love to see and talk about. And as you might be able to guess, if you look at a few of the backgrounds here behind us, we're looking at that universal symbol of the dragon. But before we go too far down this path, we're going to work our way around the room and see who all might be here. So Draven, I'll let you go first.
Oh, thanks. Thank you for having me tonight. This is the first time I've been on one of the panels, so it's kind of scary and nerve-wracking but exciting at the same time, especially since I don't normally do anything like this. I write.
Remember, dragons are perfectly fine. Everything is crunchy with ketchup.
Or maple syrup. I prefer maple syrup, but I guess ketchup in a pinch. But I am a huge dragon lover, and I write about several dragons. But I primarily write urban fantasy and action adventure, gay romance. I've been writing for several years now, so there's lots of stuff out there.
Well, welcome to the party. You'll have plenty of fun. Patrick.
Hey, I'm Patrick Dugan. I am the author of the Darkest Storm series and rule number 1, never steal from dragons.
Elektra.
I'm Elektra Hammond. I'm a writer and editor, and like everyone else, I just love those dragons.
Todd.
Hello, I'm Todd McCaffrey. You might know me from some of the Dragon Riders of Pern books, and some of you might know the Dragon Riders of Pern books. If not, one word, Dragonflight.
And Jody Lynn.
Hi, I'm Jody Lynn Nye. I write science fiction and fantasy, much of it with a humorous bent, and I am responsible for the Gazetteer volume, The Dragon Lover's Guide to Pern, which also features one Todd McCaffrey, and many short stories about dragons, and sort of live with them quite a lot, including a very adorable green dragon named Gleep, who is adopted after his previous master had to go somewhere else.
Well, welcome to everybody. So let's start a little bit just talking about your background, your history with dragons. What is your interest in them? What's your love in them? So Patrick, I'm going to actually start with you on that one.
So I started playing D&D when I was 11 because I saw the picture of the giant dragon on the front and went, oh my God, I have to have that. So that started it. And then I've read everything I could get my hands on, from Dragon Riders to all the myth books, which I love, and Stephen Brust's dragon books. I mean, just anything with dragons, I have pretty much probably devoured it at some point. So they're just magical creatures, and I absolutely love them.
How about you, Elektra?
The first one I can remember for sure is sometime in a hospital gift shop, I pulled Dragon Singer off a spinner. And I read that copy so many times, it is falling apart. And I didn't even realize there were more. When I was just over the moon when I realized there were more books in this series and I could read all of them. And I have all of them. And I back when I could read all the books in the library of the particular type, there were all the fantasy books in the library. I went and found them all, and Dragons on the Cover was just, hey, wow. So I found everything I could find.
So Todd, you might have had a few undue influences, but how about you?
Yeah, back in, I think it was 1965, maybe 66, I got thrown out of the front room by a pacing author because she wanted to think, and what did I think about dragons? And I said, why dragons? She said, because they've had bad press. I sort of believe now that Mom did a really good job rehabilitating dragons. And so they've been there for a long while. For me, Definitely, it was Weir Search, which is the first part of Dragonflight, and the way Mom brought off the dragons. But there've been many others. We have the marvelous Bob Asprin series, the Myth series, and actually Gordy Dixon did a nice job with the Dragon and the George, and then there've been others. But I think dragons are interesting because they are power symbols, and St. George slew the dragon because in the old days we didn't like power symbols. The world has changed.
How about you, Jody Lynn?
Well, probably the first dragon I ever ran into was Puff the Magic Dragon, because I was little, and that interested me because naturally he was in fact a symbol of power, but he had already been rehabilitated before Anne got around to take the fierce and toothy ones, that he was a friend to a small child, and it had a sad ending, and I always cry. But as time went by just a little bit, there were other books that had dragons in them. And then there was H.R. Puffin stuff, which was my favorite show when I was a kid. And then when I was 19, somebody said, how would you like to come and play Dungeons and Dragons with us? And naturally, I have never walked away from that. That storytelling, and you could in fact be a dragon if you wanted to, or you could be a half-elf mage, or you could be a sneaky thief. It was the collective storytelling that I loved about that. The make believe pretending out loud with other people who had imaginations, and discovering that we didn't want to leave that part of our childhood behind, and dragons were an important part of that.
How about you, Draven?
Wow, I think for as long as I can remember, I've loved dragons. I think the first one I really liked was Pete's Dragon. Remember Disney used to have like the children's books that came with an audio tape of the story. I don't know if you remember those. Anyway, so I used to have several of them, and one of them was Pete's Dragon. I used to go to sleep every night listening to Pete's Dragon. So that was so that was the first dragon that I ever really loved. And then I discovered Dragonlance. I think I was like 10, I think, when I just discovered Dragonlance. I know it wasn't too much after I think the first Dragonlance trilogy was out. So I absolutely fell in love with them, and then I started playing D&D when I was like 10 or 11. So I've been a dragon ever since.
So, dragons are one of the biggest cultural influences we see. Pretty much every culture has some flavor of dragon. We see them in a lot of, and they're always that representation of power. A lot of the times they're seen as a symbol of good luck. Sometimes they're seen as the nice big villain on the hill. We're talking a little bit about, redeeming the view of the dragon and how we perceive them here in the West and everything else. So when you look at the dragon and you look at where we're at now and your modern storytelling and the stories that you're telling now, kind of what are the influences you're pulling in? What is creating that modern influence of the dragon these days? So Elektra, how about you?
Modern influence. Oh.
Yeah, I wouldn't come out with the easy question.
You're always trying to find a new take on it, because there are so many different stories that have been told, and some of the more recent stuff that I've read have shown the dragon as the repository of wisdom, because they're often shown to be long-lived. And there's a lot of stuff with there are very few dragons left, so they're older and wiser, and we can get to know them and they can teach us things. They're always the older senior people, or they're your boss, or the person you go to get information. They're librarians and sources of knowledge. And I've seen that seems to be the direction a lot of things are heading now, rather than they're just mindless beasts that store hoards. It's going more towards sources of information. Did that make any sense? Sorry.
Sure. No, I mean, I think it gets down to that fact, the idea that we see dragons as long-lived and these sources of wisdom and strength and power. They also just like shiny things, and sometimes the crunchy villagers. I could balance between the two.
We don't seem to just want to beat them up anymore. We're trying to turn them into something we can talk to and make our friends, because we've gone beyond the let's just go kill them and take away their stuff.
How about you, Todd? I mean, obviously you guys have been a big influence in how we look at dragon lore, now.
Well, wow. I mean, I'm sitting here, you're talking to me and I'm going, oh, but what about the Dragon capsule? Elon Musk's SpaceX, and why did he use the name Dragon? So we're seeing a lot of influence with Dragon. And certainly Pern, but I'm also involved with something called the Twin Soul series, which has Wyverns and Dragons both. And it really is sort of a question of how we look at power. I think our evolving thing on dragons, you go back to Lord of the Rings and Smaug, and he's very definitely a bad dragon, and we should kill him because that's good. And then you start moving up to Bertie McAvoy's Tea with the Black Dragon, or you go off and you have a romp with Naomi Novik's Temeraire series, where you have an entirely different dragon that's huge, that has lots of people on it. When Mom and I first read that, we were kind of like, dang, why didn't we think of that? Because it was just so much fun. But I think dragons are, going psychological here, I think dragons are sort of a reflection of our own untamed abilities. And, back in the Middle Ages and all, when the church was working for dominance, dragons were bad. You had to follow these other rules. Now we're sitting there very much in, I think, Western society. We're saying dragons are good. Dragons are powerful. Dragons are what we want to become. And I think that's part of why we love dragons so much. They can do so many things. In a lot of genres and in a lot of styles, we see the wheel turns and all of a sudden we get bad dragons again. So I haven't seen that happen yet. We're still busy exploring what can be done with dragons. But I wouldn't be surprised if, 50 years from now, we start seeing evil dragons come out of the den. Maybe they're vampire dragons or weird dragons. Who knows? But for the time being, we're celebrating, dragons are at some level, they're celebrating our own power, our own ability to make huge changes. And that's why we like them.
I'm sensing an anthology here, the story of the were-dragon.
Oh, well, their dragon, but I don't know. With the Twin Soul series, we're pure fantasy, but we're steampunk fantasy. And we've been playing, we also have gods all over the place. It's kind of like, sort of like Loki and Thor, only cooler. So our gods will walk the earth or change into a dragon or be having multiple conversations all over the planet. And interact with regular old human beings, both good and bad ways. And it's a really, with that, we have dragons, and dragons are dragons and wyverns, to be precise. And also, the giant serpents, anything that's really dragon-esque, we stole and we've incorporated into this. We're having a lot of fun playing with how does that work. So there's room for dragons everywhere. I have a dragon in space story. Well, actually, Diane Duane did a dragon in space story a long time back. There's vast universes of dragons still to be explored.
How about you, Jody Lynn?
Well, you mentioned Diane Duane, but you didn't mention the dragon in the Door Into books, because that one exists only inside your mind. And I think that was a terrific approach to dragons. And naturally, Pat Reedy's wonderful books, Dancing with Dragons. And
yeah,
she always claimed there was going to be another book, Bowling with Dragons. And I'm sorry she never did that. But I think that just as much as they are a representation of wisdom and power, they are a wish fulfillment for us. They do practically all of the things that we wish we could do. We wish we could fly under our own power, not having to get on a commercial jet and have to deal with the idiot in the next seat. They have a fortune. They sleep on gold, and who wouldn't want to do that unless you have a bad back? But they are also wise. They live eons, so they can communicate. They can, in many cases, do magic. Certainly, the Pernese dragons, even though they're science-based, have almost magical powers of being able to teleport and travel in time. So dragons are not only what we would like to interact with, dragons are what we would like to be. People are impatient, people can be violent, people can walk away and shut themselves up in a cave or wish that they could. I think I froze up again. Sorry, this is going to keep happening.
Yep, we lost you for a minute, but
but dragons also represent the things that we don't want to maintain, we don't want to keep doing. So in the end, dragons are us. It's a store that ought to be on the main street, but hasn't come yet.
how about you, Draven?
I think, yeah, I agree that dragons do represent a lot of things that we wish we could be, or at least I personally wish I could be. I've always had a hard time fitting in, even with like the geeks and stuff. Or the metalheads. I hung out with a bunch of different kinds of people all growing up and in my life. And I've always felt like I was on the outside. But when I always think about dragons and envisioning how I think like dragons would be and how a society of dragons would be and behave and evolve to be, that's where I always felt more at home, with that kind of like more primal intelligence, and having those two sides of you, to be hyper intelligent on one side but really primal on the other side, and how those things balance each other within ourselves. So that's what they've always really represented.
How about you, Patrick?
I'm going to play off what Draven just said, because I think they made a point that I was thinking about earlier, which is dragons are the ultimate double-edged sword. You get age and power and wisdom, but you also are in the body of a giant beast that can basically roast you alive and have you for lunch. And so I think that, you know, it's the unknown portions of what we don't have access to. So you don't know when you're walking into the dragon's lair exactly what you're getting. So are you walking into, you know, oh, this is a, you know, sitting there drinking tea and ready to have crumpets with you, or is it you're going to turn the corner and, you know, meet a blast of fire straight in the face? So I really think that kind of duality really plays well into, you know, everything for everyone kind of thing, where you can actually take a dragon, you can make it, you know, Gleep, who's hysterical, or you can take it to, you know, like Melanie Ron's series, where the, you know, they're using the dragons as weapons. You know, it's just, you know, there's such a wide range of things you can do, and it all encompasses all of kind of the human experience. Because we've all dealt with people who were wonderful and older and wise, and we've dealt with people who, you know, rip your head off for no reason. So
I'd also like to point out, just because you mentioned it, Gleep is also, as Bob said, a stone killer.
yeah,
The only reason that he's calm around the Myth Inc. people is because Skeeb would be very upset if Gleep ate one of his friends.
yes.
So
Well,
he's all of the things you talk about being a dragon.
Yeah.
Well, and I think this is kind of a good place to go with this, is in the stories we're writing, in the stories you're crafting, yeah, how do you go about giving this great power the sense of personality and well-roundedness? because I mean, a lot of the time we see them, we perceive them as the large beast sitting there, and we want to see that projection of power and fear as it sits, on, if it's sitting on Smog sitting on its pile of treasure and thinking that hobbits, have been farm raised, so they ought to be pretty well and tasty. If we look at it, at how we're playing with and working with this lore and these characters, what is it to you that gives them that sense of life and reality when you're pulling them into a story? So Todd, it would never set you up with a rough question like that one, but
well, you got me thinking about it. And so in both cases where I'm writing with dragons, the dragons need a human to coexist. In Pern, a dragon impresses a rider, and that's where the control, the power comes from. And in the Twin Souls series, we actually, the whole reason behind the title is powerful creatures like dragons and wyverns actually have two souls, the mythical beast side and a human. So it becomes, a solid, clear-on bond. And I think that's part of sort of where we're going with dragons in a large extent, is that dragons need humans. And what we're able to do with these dragons, with these magical creatures, we're allowed to explore our own power. And I think that's sort of where we go. It's like, okay, so how does this work? How does being super powerful work? How do we manage this? How do we ride the dragon, as it were?
Well, and I actually want to throw something out there, because you keep differentiating between dragons and wyverns and everything else that's in that class. You want to kind of fill that out a little bit more for anybody who might not be familiar with those two, where the differences lie.
For me, they're kind of sort of non-events, but typically a dragon has 4 legs and 2 wings, whereas a wyvern only has 2 wings and 2 legs. And that's kind of the big difference there. You also get your worms, like your Chinese dragons, which are sort of worms, and sometimes they have feet. Most times they don't have wings whatsoever, but they can also fly. There's a sort of a whole realm of, dragonalia, as it were. So the reason I distinguish between a wyvern and a dragon is just because there's some confusion. I mean, George Martin's in the Game of Thrones series, they were depicting a wyvern, not a dragon. Is it a big deal to me? No, but it's a differentiator that's there. Also, you have drakes. Come to think of it, you have really small things. On Pern, they'd be fire lizards, and those are kind of more. Depends upon where you go. They're more controllable. They're more boisterous. There are a whole bunch of other things, not as powerful, obviously, or maybe not obviously. So it's, there's a whole, your imagination is the limit on this one. You can go anywhere with it.
So how about you, Draven, with your dragons? How are you going about crafting them? How are you going about giving them that sense of life and reality?
It's kind of I guess not a hard question, but kind of a long one. I have 2 different paradigms of mine that have 2 different kinds of dragons in them. One of them is actually set in the future, and where humanity is actually not enslaved by supernatural creatures, but they're definitely ruled by supernatural creatures of all kinds. I kind of went a little haywire with this paradigm and threw a bunch of stuff in that I just kind of wanted to do, but it works.
That's the joy of being a writer.
Yeah,
it works. And so the dragons in that paradigm are actually the bankers of the world, and they're just like what we would consider like the larger versions. They would, I guess, probably be classified as drakes, but they have the same intelligence, they have magic, they have everything. They're just the size of like a Maine Coon. But they're the bankers. of the world, and so they run all the currency between the different realms that interact, and they have different kinds of hordes. I have a small serial that I've been writing about a bank teller. He's just a plain ordinary bank teller, and he hoards socks. He obviously cannot wear socks because they can't change into any other kind of shape, but he hoards socks, and he has a pet cat who likes to chew on his socks. And so there's those dragons, which to me is just kind of like, I just wanted to do something a little whimsical and fluffy with it, but also very ordinary on top of it, if that makes sense. So that I have a lot of fun with. And then my other dragons are actually aliens who came to Earth many millennia ago because they destroyed their planet, and they needed they scattered across the universe and not rehabilitated, but
Repopulated.
Thank you. I was going to go with colonization. I was like, but that didn't really work either. Other planets, and so they came to Earth and ruled behind the scenes for many years via their emissaries that they created via technological advancement in science and magic, because it's very techno-mage kind of stuff, where they created these hybrid creatures between the local animals and humanity to create creatures that could shift between animals and humans so that they could interact with humanity for them, because they didn't want to interact with humanity. They wanted to stay far away from humans. So they created these creatures to interact with humanity for them. But over time, because humanity grew so large, they had to take steps to hide amongst the humans and finally change their own magic so that they could then shift into a human shape. And so they've been living amongst humans for a very long time. And then currently there's a huge war that's about to break out. But a lot of their mentality was about conservation and conserving Earth from what humans were already doing to it, even several millennia ago, and try to control how humans used the Earth so that the Earth wouldn't befall the same things that their home planet did.
How about you, Jody Lynn? So your dragons, how are you bringing them back to life?
You treat them just like any other character. You give them a personality. You give them things that they need to strive for, need to preserve, a goal and aim. I wrote a story a few years ago for a charity anthology about a biker girl who ends up in a dragon's lair, and this dragon has been staying away from humans because they are pretty destructive, and he has a whole history of having to deal with people that every eon or so they try to kill him, and he has to show his power again, and he's getting really bored with this. But as any being that you want your audience to empathize with, it has to have feelings, has to have something that you can, as the reader, can connect with. So what is it that the story needs? What do you want to do with your dragon? If you want them like Harry Potter's dragons, only to be dangerous monsters, that's okay. If you want them to be characters other people interact with, if you want them to have secrets or to have a message to give to humanity, like Dravens, you build that into the character and you present it in that fashion. So it's like any other form of storytelling. And I took over one of Robert Asprin's series. Well, have taken over two of them that both have dragons in them. But the dragons that is set in New Orleans, they have been hiding from human beings right in plain sight because they're shapeshifters. And only a few of them are still pure blood. So they can make the transformation all the way to dragon and manifest all of dragon powers and abilities and invulnerability, as it were. And what does that mean to them to discover that they have these pent up powers that they didn't even know about? So that's telling a story of not only coming of age, but learning to manage your power, of giving them the opportunity to be more than human, to say, I have these abilities. I could go crazy. I could rule the world. But is that really what I want? Is that a good use of my time? And the approach very much depends on what you want to do with your story.
And the question is, would anybody notice during Mardi Gras?
No. As it happens, if you read Dragon's Deal, you will find that out.
How about you, Patrick?
So I went off the rails with my dragons. So mine actually are born in human form, and they molt into what we consider a dragon, like the elder dragon type. So they actually go through molting cycles of where they become more and more dragon-ish. But they're on a planet where all the hidden people from Earth left because the planet had gotten too toxic for them. So the dragons actually rule based on their color, what color they are, dragon, and which type. So so my main guy in the book is wearing basically a Hugo Boss suit and with the electric mohawk and the facial hair. So he's pretty much a badass. So I went completely opposite with how I did my dragons.
How about you, Elektra?
I haven't written enough dragons to really call attention to them. They've been just sort of flying in, burning stuff up, and flying back out. I'd like to call attention to Seanan Mcguire's dragons from her Encrypted series, where she's differentiated the male and female of the species, and the girl dragons look like beautiful blonde Barbie dolls, and the males look like we'd expect dragons to look like, lizards. And that's how they've lived safely among the humans, where the women can go out and sort of mingle and fit in, and they bring back what the men need. But the men have mostly, they've been killed off for the most part because dragons are scary and evil. And of course, there are bad people trying to kill off all the encrypteds. Highly recommended series.
A lot of fun.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, they're great books.
Yeah.
As a writer, always borrow things if you don't have it yourself.
File off the serial numbers and reuse them.
Well,
No, I'm not claiming it. I'm just bringing it to light.
No, it was on my list of thoughts as well. It's like, oh, I got to mention that because she had such a lot of fun with it.
Yeah.
So let's go. Actually, I think that's a good place to go. So when we look at, because as you say, we are inspired by how other people interpret, folklore and myth and legend, these sorts of things. How do you see who's influenced your work? I mean, whose influences really have come in, and that if you look, you can see that influence coming into your dragons, your work, your stories, and even like Elektra, even though you're sitting there going, I haven't written the big heavy dragons, but I mean, we still find these influences working their way. So Jody Lynn, how about you? Who are the big influences pulling in for your wee beasties?
The latest dragon story I wrote was for a Writers of the Future anthology. And instead of me writing a story and having it illustrated, I wrote the story based on the cover painting by an artist called Ciruelo of a wizard standing on a mountaintop with his arms outstretched and a silver dragon sort of circling in to land beside him, to blast him out of existence. But it was such an opportunity to come up with a great story to go with that beautiful piece of art. And I think a lot of people are influenced by art and by visuals. Dragons themselves were probably influenced, because they're worldwide, by dinosaur skeletons. by the stories that people told in order to make sense of their world. And one of them had to be, we came across these gigantic bones and skulls with great big sharp teeth. So where are they and why aren't they around here anymore? Well, maybe they were all slain. Maybe they got into a huge war and slew themselves, or maybe they simply withdrew from interacting with humans. So I think that that kind of influence of a story has also worked for me, but I think that it also has worked for storytellers historically.
So Draven, how about you? What are the influences that came into your sock hoarding dragons?
My what?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, Draven.
I think you're fine. You're fine.
Again. I got frozen again.
I think all my dragons have several different elements that I pull in. Definitely a lot of from my Dragon War series. A lot of the different dragon clans and stuff are definitely derived from mythology of different parts of the world, depending on where they're from. You know, mixed in with good old D&D. Baselines with different breath weapons and different powers based on color and type. I definitely pulled in a lot of those kinds of concepts for them. And then my other ones, I really just kind of just shrunk my bigger ones and said, what if? What if they were just these small, hyper intelligent beings that just like to collect random things?
The dragons are giant cats.
Pretty much.
How about you, Patrick?
I think my biggest influence was Michael Whalen.
Oh, wow.
I mean, I have his collection, his art book collection, and everything, if it had his art on it, I bought it. It didn't matter what it was. And I think that's really, his artwork caught my imagination, and that's what set me to writing. Because when I was younger and I would see him, I would actually like write stories around the covers, to make up, wasn't fan fiction. It was more of like what I thought would happen given the artwork. And so like Dragon's Bane by Barbara Hamley. I thought that was a fantastic book because she treated it like her main character wasn't like some gallant knight. He was like used poison and javelins and just dirty tricks to fight. And so just, every time I saw one of his paintings, I picked up the book and read it. So he really, inspired me to tell stories because I just, loved it. I loved all of his art.
And it seems like that golden age of brilliant artwork on a cover selling a book has gone. And I regret that. I think it's an error.
I think it is diminished, but when we do conventions, Natanya Barron does my covers for my steampunk series, and people still stop, look at it, and buy it because they love the cover. I mean, she just, but I agree with you. The days of walking through the bookstore and stopping and going, "Oh my God, I have to have that," are rare.
Yeah, it was really Whalen's White Dragon that sold the White Dragon book and made Pern take off. And so it's like, wow.
Well, it's supposed to be a cover. The cover is the stamp on the envelope. The cover is supposed to sell it to the people who would love the book the most.
Yeah.
Well, there's so little original artwork being done now that's physical. So much of it is original digital. Yeah. And there isn't as much art out there for people who actually collect physical art. That's a whole nother thing now.
Well, and talking about the cover art, so one of the first books that came out in one of my series when I was working with the artist, there's a joke in there, and part of what I wanted to do was have the dragon crawling out of the treasure box like he's leaning on it, sitting next to the bar and smoking a cigar. And she was like, "Oh yeah, I can." At first she was like, "I don't understand." All of a sudden you could see the little light bulb. I was like, I want the, working for the joke of the cover, the dragon sitting there, leaned up like, okay, I'm the gangster dragon and puffing on the cigar. And the number of people that would stop at a convention or things like that, those covers were great for forever. Because everybody would stop and just, they thought that was so much fun to watch that part on the cover. So Elektra, how about you? What kind of influences do you see making it into your writing?
When I've read a lot of short stories with dragons, the first one that comes to mind is always that George Business by Roger Zelazny, an old one, but a good one. The way he could pull together the personality of a dragon and bring in so much humor and tell such a fantastic story in so short a piece. I've always tried to do something like that in my own writing, to be able to get across such great ideas and be funny and be clever and all at the same time. And one day I will be able to do this, maybe before I die. I hope. That story has stuck with me for decades.
Well, and Todd, I'd be curious to know about the influences that came in, both for you, but also as your mom was working on Dragon Riders of Pern and these series. What kind of influences have you gotten? What kind of influences do you know she might have had in going in and building out the myth and the lore?
I'm obviously a different case from my mother. I don't really know where she got her dragon lore from. I think she made it up whole cloth. She wanted to present a problem. She wanted to have a reason for dragons to be perceived as good. And so she invented an issue. And basically, with Dragonflight, she recreated the RAF's finest hour. We had this fight against an implacable foe. And it was a mindless foe, and if we didn't fight it, we would all die. So it was the ultimate, you've got to do this thing. And the dragons were invented as the best biological weapon against threat. So she built this huge, backstory that worked out very, very nicely. And where the heck she pulled it from, she never quite explained. I think really it was the way mom works, is she wanted a reason for dragons to be good. Therefore, she came up with da 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 da. Hence why I was thrown out of the living room all those years back. But a reminder, I was maybe 9 or 10 when I was thrown out of the living room. So some people are going, how did she? Anyway, I think that was her big influence. I read all over the place, and we sometimes are in conversation with the books we've read in the past. We're sometimes off doing our own thing, where I have dragons in my own works or in my collaborative works. Generally, it's not because I'm in conversation with anything else. It's because what we know about dragons. They're powerful, they're huge, they can be dangerous. So where I'm writing other stuff, I just recently, with the series I'm working on now, the Canaris Rift series, I realized that, I'm in conversation with Heinlein's series, with Frank Herbert's Dune, with Jim Bliss's Cities in Flight, with Anne McCaffrey's The Tower and the Hive series, sort of all over the place. But it's about the first time I've actually looked at a series and said, how much of this is in conversation or influenced by other things? Most of the times I just write them because I want to tell this story.
So one of the things that always fascinates me, and we did a panel on this, it's been a couple of years ago at a convention, where we talking about dragons, it was the balance between muscle and magic. What is just the biological physical creature, and how much of it is going through that idea of the magic, the power, and everything else. So if we look at that kind of balance for you and the things that work for you and appeal to you and that you're working in, where's kind of that sweet spot for you? Is it just the nice big beastie that's got wings? Or is it that really full, heavily magical creature that we all have to embrace? So Draven, I'm gonna throw this one at you.
Because you don't want your dragons to be like too overpowered. There has to be, I think, a balance there between, cosmic awesome power and control and realism too. As much fantasy as we may write, there has to be, that thin line of realism in there to really, like, I think, ground it. So as much as I may throw physics out the window when it comes to my dragons and them being able to fly and cloak themselves, there's certain things that I, had to take into consideration, like procreation, and are they dying out, after living on a different planet for, however long, or, how did their magic work and regenerate? Is there something on the planet that helps to regenerate their magic, or is it just, coming out from their own biology? But I think that there really does need to be, that, as fantastical as it is, that like thin line of realism that just grounds it a little bit and makes it just a little bit more real and substantial, in my opinion.
Patrick?
I really like the more of the nature version of the dragons, where they're intelligent, but they're not like magic users. They just have immense physical power. They can breathe fire. They, their scales make them invulnerable. That type stuff, where there's actually a physical force that is what you're worried about, not that they're going to cast magic missiles at your head. I think that's always been, and I think it's because I grew up in D&D, and that's where my birthing of dragons came from. So they were always like, it's in the name, Dungeons Dragons. So, they were always like the ultimate when you got to the end of the campaign and you opened that last door and there was the dragon waiting for you. It's like, oh yeah, that's not going to end well. So that's where I've always kind of my sweet spot for dragons are.
I always try talking to the dragon first.
Be polite to the dragon. Be polite. It's bigger than you are and it can spit fire. How about you, Elektra?
One of my absolute favorite incarnations of dragons was done by Mercedes Lackey and James Mallory in, there are at least 3 trilogies they've put together that hold the stuff together. The first one was the Obsidian Mountain trilogy. And they've got very long-lived elves and very long-lived dragons. And the dragons think, as do the elves, about things for a very, very long time before they do anything. And they are very powerful and they are magic. But again, there's this ponderous feeling to everything they do is weighed down with the consequences. Everything must be considered before they do anything, because the weight of centuries comes with them. And I really like the way they handle that. And just the great balance between I am big, I am strong, I am powerful, but if I fight this battle, what's it going to do 1,000 years from now? And that whole sense of history is something that you don't often see considered. So
I am dragon, hear me sigh.
let's have a cup of tea and think about it before we do anything.
For 4 or 5 centuries.
Yep.
How about you, Todd?
Wow. I've totally lost the question. I was listening to the answer.
Well, it's physical mechanics, muscle versus magic. How much of it is these are real solid creatures that we're giving, solid biology and physics and all the rest of that to the system that they're working with versus how much of it is hand wavium and IFM that we just need our creatures to work this way.
For me, I tend to work from character and from plot situations. So I learned from my mom. I basically invent the world I need to tell the story in. I was thinking of at one time I was asked to write for a charity anthology, and I decided I would explore something like the meek shall inherit the earth. Okay, so why do you need to be meek? So I make somebody have a dragon wife. And so he spends most of his time trying to invent, flame-proof armor, because if she gets angry, it's a bad thing. And I know why dragons hoard gold. It's because they get migraines, and the gold helps mitigate the migraines, right? Hey, wouldn't it work for you? A whole, rolling in a pile of gold. It's easy to get rid of that migraine and forget. Yeah. Anyway, so, the biology and everything else comes up as I need it or as I don't need it. So, when I build my dragons, that's kind of where it is. And a lot of times I'm moving more towards pantserdom. It's like, let's start with an idea and see what happens. And so what will happen is as I continue the story, I build up the world building in the background. If I'm writing a short story, I don't put too much effort into it, unless somehow this particular short story has grabbed me and I go, oh, I have to tell this story. And that's where it sits with me.
Jody Lynn.
Well, it's a matter of balance. If you have magic, you don't need muscle, and vice versa, because you are able to attain the tasks that you want to with one or the other. And if the dragon in my story is the protagonist, they will never have enough magic and muscle combined to be able to achieve what they want to right away, because if they do, then I don't have a story. So there needs to be character development. There needs to be a chance for my dragon to strive and figure out a way to do what it is that dragon needs to do. If the dragon is the enemy, all bets are off, because I need to have something for my character to strive for to be able to defeat the menace, because dragons are symbolic of all sorts of obstacles in life. And I am happy to use it as a symbol, but also as a personality, one that's always a couple of steps ahead of you until you figure out exactly where that creature's weaknesses lie. So it's a lot of fun to play with. And I always want to make certain that the character has to use every single resource at their disposal to make that jump, to succeed, to gather all the information, to change, to get past their own misgivings. Like I said, they are still characters. They're still a vital character that I need my audience to root for. And if it's a dragon, then what is it that they have feared all the time? What is it that they have stopped doing or never were able to do in the first place? You can think of a children's book of the dragon who couldn't fly, or any of the other little moralistic tales where that change is what is waiting to happen towards the end.
So as we're kind of coming up on time, I do want to throw one thing out there, because dragons are a huge topic. We could spend days upon days talking about it, myth, folklore. But what's the number one thing we haven't talked about tonight that really, about the myth, about the folklore, about the stories you've written? What's the one thing for you that you want to make sure we talk about tonight? So I'll throw that out to the floor and see who wants to go first.
No one's talked about breathing fire. And how the heck do you make that possible biologically?
You produce a phosphine-bearing gas that explodes upon contact with oxygen. And we have stuff like that in weaker forms here on Earth, like Vivianite. Yeah, don't get me involved in the science of Pern dragons. I've been down that rabbit hole, and it still gives me nightmares.
You give the clean dragons flamethrowers. Oops, did I say that out loud?
Yeah. They somebody did a really cool spoof on designing dragons. They were hydrogen based, and their purpose was to trim treetops from getting too tall. And because they were hydrogen based and they excreted hydrogen, that made them light enough to fly. And it also meant that, you know, their breath could include hydrogen, which explodes on contact with oxygen. So it was like really, really nicely done, and just a lot
They
of
didn't
fun.
explode or anything?
Huh?
They didn't explode or anything?
No, of course not. I mean, one, we have a quote scientific paper on how to design dragons to trim treetops. So of course you would have built in, and for that matter, we play with hydrogen in our bodies, just not so much blatantly. Yeah, this was a joke. It was kind of fun. But yeah, I mean, it's not hard to go make fire. We do it all the time. Rub two Girl Scouts together,
I'm picturing somebody scares the dragon and it just puffs up like a giant puffer fish, just kind of hovering.
That could do it too. Yeah. Yeah. Lois Bujold in Shards of Honor had them explore a planet where they had something she called radials, which apparently did a hydrogen metabolism and floated. They were actually vampires. They would float down on top of something and suck blood out of them, but that's a different story. But they too were floating hydrogen-based thingies. Whoops, I shook myself. So I mean, we do that. Dragons breathing fire, that's not hard. And there's, like you say, there's a whole bunch of different realms of dragons and different ways to look at dragons. Naomi Novik with the Temeraire series had super huge dragons on which you would mount squads of men. And so I guess that's another thing we haven't exploited too much is, how to use dragon size. But I don't know, because you have such a realm of possibility, you can't really narrow it down and say, well, but you forgot this because that only exists in that realm.
Well, and I think one of the big things that we find especially in storytelling is trying to balance the dragons and how they fit into the human world or the other species that are around. And to try to make that living world where the dragons are in balance or not with humanity or whatever other species may be on the planet as well. Because again, going back to the idea of Pern, you've got the dragon riders that are basically bonded to the dragons. That's, they've got a symbiotic relationship versus a lot of the stories where we see, whoever happens to walk by is crunchy and a threat. The nice part is you don't actually have to pull out the grill. Well, I want to say thanks very much to everybody for joining this evening. But before we get out of here, if you'll let everybody know where to find you, website, social media, all that kind of good stuff. And because I can and somebody turn me loose, we're going to go in reverse order. So Jody Lynn, how about you?
You can find me on Facebook, Jody Lynn Nye, and my website is currently being renovated, so it'll be back at some point. So jodylynnye.com or jodynye.net. And stay tuned. Interesting things are happening.
Todd?
You can find me on Facebook. You can find me on Instagram. You can find me on Twitter, although I'm not very active there. I have two websites, both of which need to be updated. One is toddmccaffrey.com and one is toddmccaffrey.org, which is the older one. And, hopefully the world will be opening up again soon and you will see me at Comic-Cons and other places like that.
Elektra?
I am on all the places and you can find links to everything at untilmidnight.com.
Patrick?
I am at patrickdugan.net. I'm on Facebook as Patrick Dugan Author. I'm also on Twitter under the same name and Instagram.
And Draven?
You can find pretty much everything at dgcarothers.com. All of my books and audiobooks you can buy directly from there. Plus, you can find me on Facebook and Instagram primarily, but I spend most of my time on my website. I have a members only group that fans can join to interact directly with me there. I like it much better than Facebook. But thank you everybody for having me today.
Oh,
Well,
good to hear from you.
absolutely. We want to thank everybody for coming and hanging out with us this evening. And I've had the pleasure of being your host, Jim Nettles. You can find me at jamespnettles.com, authoressentials.net, speculativeffictionacademy.com. I occasionally show up on Facebook, Insta, the hive of scummy and villainy that is Twitter. And of course, here at ConTinual when they'll let me out to go and play. So until next time, we'll see everybody again soon. Thanks for joining us.